When Jack Harper moved into his dream home by the lake, the last thing he expected was to be attacked for docking his own boat. Yet Nancy, the notorious HOA Karen, tried to humiliate him and even called the police to force him off his own property. But Jack had one powerful card in his hands that turned the entire neighborhood against her. Just wait until you hear the stunning twist in this drama and how justice at last prevailed. My name is Jack Harper, and just a few weeks ago I thought I had finally achieved the dream I'd been working toward for years. After saving, searching, and visiting more open houses than I could count, I found it. A quiet, charming neighborhood on the outskirts of Texas. It wasn't just a house. It was everything I wanted. The home itself had character, a stone facade that gave it a timeless look, wide front windows that filled the living room with sunlight, and a spacious garage where I could finally keep all my tools and projects. But what truly sold me was what waited in the backyard. The property sloped gently down to the edge of a private lake. When I first stepped outside and heard the soft lapping of the water against the shoreline, I felt an instant peace. I could already imagine mornings spent casting a line, weekends with friends cruising across the water, and quiet evenings just watching the reflections of the sunset dance across the surface. It wasn't long before I decided to bring in my boat. I had owned it for years, always dreaming of giving it a proper home instead of paying fees at crowded marinas. The first week after moving in, I was out by the pier, tightening ropes, making sure the boat was securely docked. The day was perfect. Calm skies, warm breeze, the kind of day that makes you grateful for every choice that led you there. And then, without warning, the peace shattered. A sharp, commanding voice rang out behind me. "You can't keep that junk here. HOA rules forbid boats." I froze, not from guilt, but from pure confusion. I turned slowly, half expecting maybe a curious neighbor introducing themselves. Instead, standing at the edge of my property was a woman I'd never seen before. She looked to be in her 50s, with a severe short haircut, oversized sunglasses pushed up onto her head, and a posture that radiated authority, or at least the desire for it. Her arms were crossed, her chin slightly raised, and the way she stared at me made it seem like she was inspecting a trespasser rather than greeting a new neighbor. Her name, I would later learn, was Nancy. But around here, everyone had already given her another name, HOA Karen. She was the head of the Homeowners Association, and from the first words out of her mouth, it was clear she believed she ran the entire neighborhood like her personal kingdom. My shock wasn't just from her tone. It was the fact that this was my very first interaction with anyone in the community. I hadn't even had a chance to knock on a neighbor's door, to shake hands or share a polite hello. And here I was, standing on my own property, being threatened before I'd even had time to settle in. The boat, my lakefront, my dream. All of it suddenly felt like it was under attack by someone who didn't even bother to ask my name first. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a neighborly introduction. This was the beginning of a battle. I tried to keep my composure. I looked at her squarely and spoke in a calm, measured tone. "The boat is tied to my pier, and I'm not bothering anyone." For a brief second, I thought maybe reason would work. Maybe she was simply mistaken. Maybe she'd realized she had overstepped and would back down. But instead, Nancy rolled her eyes so hard it was almost theatrical. Her lips curled into a half-smile that wasn't friendly at all. "You're new here," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "And clearly, you think the rules don't apply to you. Around here, everyone does what I say. "That boat is leaving," or "I'm calling the cops." The way she emphasized what I say sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't about rules. It wasn't about some handbook. This was about her ego, her desire to dominate, to make sure every person in this neighborhood knew exactly who was in charge. I took a breath, reminding myself this was my property, my pier, my boat. I had every right to stand my ground. But before I could even decide what to do next, Nancy spun on her heel and marched off toward her house. At first, I thought maybe she was bluffing, trying to scare me into compliance. But 30 minutes later, as I adjusted some ropes on the dock, I saw her again. This time, she was standing at the edge of her driveway, with her phone pressed to her ear. Her voice carried across the quiet street, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious man. He's illegally parking a boat, refusing to comply with HOA rules." I stood frozen in disbelief. She was really doing it. She was actually calling emergency services, twisting the story to paint me as some kind of intruder. One by one, neighbors began stepping out of their houses. A couple leaned on their fences. Another group stood on the sidewalk across the street. Some exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable, but no one spoke up. No one told Nancy to stop. I felt the heat rising in my chest. This wasn't just about a boat anymore. This was public humiliation. She wasn't satisfied with scolding me privately. She wanted an audience. She wanted to prove to the entire community that she could bend the new guy to her will. And the worst part, she knew exactly how it looked. A woman calling for help, pointing across the street at her neighbor. It was designed to make me look guilty before anyone even heard my side. Inside, I was boiling. Every second she spoke into that phone, twisting the truth, the fire grew hotter. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was the sting of injustice, the sharp bite of being falsely accused while others stood by in silence. I clenched my fists, not out of aggression, but out of the desperate need to hold my ground, because in that moment, surrounded by curious eyes and whispered conversations, I realized exactly what she wanted, to make me small, to make me bend. And I also realized something else. I wasn't about to let her win. The flashing lights came first, bouncing off the windows and the calm surface of the lake. 2 police cruisers pulled up along the curb, and within seconds, 2 officers stepped out. Their expressions were calm, professional, but I could feel every pair of eyes in the neighborhood trained on me. Neighbors leaned forward, whispering, eager to see how this scene would play out. Nancy wasted no time. She marched toward the officers, waving her arms like she was directing traffic. "Officers, over here, that man refuses to follow our rules. He's illegally storing a boat. You need to remove it immediately." She spoke quickly, as if trying to frame the entire situation before I could open my mouth. I could feel my jaw tighten. My pulse was pounding in my ears. But instead of raising my voice, I reached into my folder, the one I had carefully prepared when I bought the property. When the officers finally turned to me, I didn't waste a second. I held out the documents with steady hands. "Good afternoon, officers. I believe this will clear everything up." They scanned through the paperwork, the deed to my house, the official survey maps, and the section that mattered most. The part that clearly stated that the lake, the pier, and the land surrounding it were legally mine. Not the HOA's, not the community's. Mine. The officers exchanged a glance. Their faces didn't show much, but I saw it. That subtle flicker of realization, the weight of the truth settling in. And then they turned toward Nancy. Her confident smirk faltered. Her face flushed crimson as she stammered, What? No, no, that's impossible. The lake is common property. The HOA controls it. Everyone knows that. Her voice was higher now, shrill, edged with panic. She wasn't used to being challenged. She wasn't used to losing control. I took a step forward, planting my feet firmly on my dock, and spoke with the kind of clarity that only comes when anger sharpens into steel. No, Nancy, the HOA manages the roads and the community parks. But the lake? The lake was purchased along with my lot. It's in the deed. This is my land, my water. And just to be clear, you didn't just try to enforce a fake rule. You called 911 on the rightful owner of the property. The crowd behind us shifted. I heard the low murmur of neighbors, and for the first time since I had moved in, some of them were smiling. Not at me, but at the collapse of the false authority that had ruled over them for so long. Inside, the anger still burned, but it wasn't the wild fire of frustration anymore. It was something focused, something controlled. Every word I spoke was deliberate. Every sentence a strike at the empire Nancy thought she had built. And in that moment, standing tall while she flailed, I realized something important. I didn't just defend myself. I had exposed the truth she had been hiding behind for years. For the first time, the balance had shifted. The two officers handed my documents back with respectful nods. Their verdict was clear and final. "Sir, you're within your full rights to keep the boat where it is." One of them said, "This property, including the water and pier, belongs to you. We have no grounds to ask you to move anything." Then the other officer turned toward Nancy. His expression stayed polite, but his tone carried weight. "Ma'am, making false emergency calls is a serious matter. This number is for real emergencies, not personal disputes. Consider this a warning." The silence that followed was heavy, and then suddenly it broke. From across the street, a neighbor clapped. Another joined in. Within seconds, a ripple of applause spread through the crowd. Some were laughing quietly, others smiling openly. And for the first time, the neighborhood wasn't afraid to show what they really thought. One man even called out with a grin, "Well, Karen, looks like you'll need Jack's permission if you ever want to fish again." The laughter that followed wasn't cruel, but it was sharp, and it stung. Nancy's face, once smug and self-assured, was now flushed with humiliation. She muttered something under her breath, turned on her heel, and stormed back to her house, her authority crumbling with each step. I stood there on my dock, the warm evening air brushing against my face, the lake calm and unbothered by all the drama. I looked out at the water, at the reflection of the fading sun, and for the first time since moving in, I truly felt at home. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Not just the validation of being right, but the satisfaction of watching truth win over intimidation. She had tried to embarrass me in front of everyone. She had tried to strip away my rights, my dignity, even my peace. But in the end, she was the one who had been exposed, not as powerful, but as petty. And the best part? I didn't have to shout. I didn't have to argue. All I had to do was stand firm, let the truth speak for itself, and watch as justice quietly but unmistakably landed where it belonged. The neighbors who once stayed silent were now nodding in approval, some even walking over to shake my hand. The icy distance I had felt that first week melted away. I wasn't just the new guy anymore. I was the neighbor who had stood up, who hadn't let the so-called queen of the HOA push him around. As the officers left and the crowd slowly dispersed, I sat down at the edge of my pier, letting my feet dangle above the water. The lake stretched out before me, wide, peaceful, and mine. HOA Karen wanted my boat gone. What she didn't know was that I owned the whole lake, and in that quiet, golden moment, I smiled. Because sometimes victories don't have to be loud to be sweet. Sometimes the sweetest justice is simply living your dream, while the person who tried to take it away walks home defeated. That was my small but oh so satisfying victory of justice.